After a well-earned week off, Ireland are gearing up for their final World Cup pool match against Scotland in the Stade de France on Saturday night. A win or a draw will see Andy Farrell's men march on to the World Cup quarter-final. A loss, and it starts to get a little bit complicated. So plenty to discuss on tonight's episode of the Left Wing podcast. Will Slattery here with you. I'm delighted to be joined by Luke Fitzgerald and Jonathan Bradley. And thanks again for everyone who got in touch on Spotify, Twitter with their questions and queries. We'll try to get to them during the show. But now, Luke, how are you feeling ahead of the Scotland game? As I said, well-earned week off. Conor Murray and Peter O'Mahony had a few glasses of rosé, chilled out, and they're now back at it, ready to go. Are you feeling confident?
No. I'm a little bit nervous about it. I thought I was talking to another ex-international, and we both had the same opinion, thinking, God, we wish that those photos hadn't surfaced of the guys having the rosé. Look, no problem with it. You know, I'm sure they didn't overdo it. But just not a great one to have up. I think if you were in Scotland's camp, I think that one might be mentioned.
I think there's plenty of bulletin board material from Scotland to Ireland.
No, there is, but we're talking about just if you're asking about why I'm nervous. And look, I did say this at the time. You know, I think the week off for Ireland has actually come at a perfect time. I think they get to go into camp on the Thursday. 10 days is plenty before getting ready for an international, and I think they'll have got that intensity up early. I just wish that some of the antics maybe after the South Africa game, and then some of the kind of photos like that would look like guys relaxing. They're supposed to do that on their time off. I just wish they hadn't surfaced. That's the problem with social media nowadays, isn't it? But as you said, look, Scotland seem pretty confident as well. I think they've probably flattered to deceive, I think, on a number of occasions in this respect, and probably talked themselves up in prior games and haven't delivered. But yeah, look, of course you're going to be nervous in a game like this. I think Ireland, to just be completely blunt and honest about it, Ireland are a better team than Scotland, and if Ireland play well, I think Scotland are wrong. I think if Ireland, if one of their players today came out and said that if they play well they should win, I don't think that's the case. I think there's more to it than that. If Scotland play well and Ireland play well, Ireland win this game for me, Will. And that's as simple as it is. And I think this Ireland team will have enough time to refocus, and get a good start to the game, which is going to be really key. I just think, first 20 minutes of the game, set the tone, very, very physical. I think the clear advantage we have over them is in our pack. Lay down a marker early at scrum, get the line out right, get the confidence up, and try and bully this Scotland team out of this game. And I think that combined with a stingy defence, Ireland bring this one home.
Yeah, it was replacement hooker Ewan Ashman who was very bullish in his comments after the win against Romania. And he wasn't the only one. Cameron Redpath, similar comments. Gregor Townsend actually talks them up as much as anyone. Jonathan, what's if I take a temperature check from you in terms of your thoughts heading into the weekend? As Luke mentioned, like the down week came at a good time probably for Ireland. And even for us, we were the high of South Africa kind of went away. I'm sure we all watched the various one-sided games over the weekend, and now we're kind of gearing up again for one of the big weekends coming up. How are you feeling about things?
Yeah, there's absolutely no reason to be less confident than we were last week. Like, there's nothing that's changed to alter in any way the confidence going into this game. But I think it is just that realization that's coming in of the fact that as well as Ireland have played and as smoothly as everything has gone during this entire World Cup campaign, the fact that Ireland are just one defeat away against the fifth best side in the world from their World Cup being over on Saturday, I think that's quite a sudden realization for a lot of people. It's just the way the fixtures have fallen. You talk about the down week, but I know Rassie has spoken about it in terms of being in the more preferable position because they've got their games done. But I think, like as Luke says, Ireland are the better side. We'll come to touch on it later, but I don't think we have any reason to believe that complacency is going to sneak in. And for those reasons, I think you have to be confident that this Ireland team that has consistently got the job done over the past 2 years will get the job done again.
Yeah, I think any kind of semblance of complacency is blown away if I was an Ireland player. Like, just listening to the rubbish coming out of the Scotland camp, honestly, I would actually just be astounded. And I know people might say, Ireland don't, you guys don't give Scotland the respect they deserve, but I don't think there's a whole lot of respect coming out of the Scotland camp. They're playing the number one ranked team in the world, 16 wins in a row, Grand Slam champions, series winners in New Zealand, have beaten Scotland 8 times in a row. And just the sub-hooker saying, we get our process right, we win, and we go into the quarterfinals. I'm just like, what planet is this man living on? And if I was Andy Farrell, I would be loving it because, like what a way to kind of focus the minds and be like, these guys think they can just come in, play their game, and then they're just marching on and you'll be going home. That's not like that's just psychologically, I think, a good place for Ireland to be in, actually.
Yeah, but the only thing is, like, as any athlete going into a game, I think you've got to believe that if you deliver on the game plan that you've devised, that you should be able to come out victorious. It's you've got to think that way, and the people that never win aren't able to do that. You have to be able to envisage a way to get over the line.
But thinking it and saying it publicly,
Well, I think that's fine. Look, I would always agree with you on that one. I always think, it's better to be a little bit measured, but sometimes it just comes out raw, and sometimes you actually want to deliver a message. I'm not sure it's the right one. I think they did mention that all the pressure is on Ireland. I think Hamish Watson did come out and say that, all the pressure is on Ireland, which I do think it kind of is. And
is it though?
No, I think it is. Yeah, 100% it is. Like, I think, the good thing for Ireland is that their destiny is in their own hands. I would love to touch on Rassie's comments, but maybe...
Yeah, we'll touch on that in a minute, but I just...
I think Ireland's destiny is in their own hands. I think if they play to their potential or somewhere close to it, I think they win this game. Scotland, on the other hand, I didn't really take offence to any of that because I don't think they've delivered. But I think if you were going to deliver, and I agree with you, they haven't done it to date. But if you are going to deliver it, you have to try and speak it into existence, at least internally. Not sure I agree, as you have mentioned, with doing it publicly, but sometimes that's a good way of doing it. It puts pressure back on you to perform and deliver on what you're saying behind closed doors, because sometimes those things can just stay there, Will. So some people actually do that to kind of stir up a bit of pressure in their own camp to deliver, and they haven't done it historically or in recent history, but there has to be a first time, doesn't there?
Yeah, Jonathan.
Well, what are they meant to say? This sort of becomes a narrative every time they play Scotland, but Will, you'll have been in press conferences, I've been in press conferences where we're going in and we're asking, what do you think of your chances today? And you never expect anybody to say, no, we're going to get beat, or we always lose to them, but we'll give it a lash. I don't really mind the confidence.
A middle ground would be, because I get your point. People say, oh, should they be saying, oh, we haven't a chance, they've beaten St. Thomas in a row? But no, a middle ground of being like, we're confident, we feel like if we play well, we can beat them. But to throw out something like, we can beat any team in the world in our day when you're 0-8 against Ireland under Gregor Townsend, you haven't beaten South Africa or New Zealand under Gregor Townsend, and then just for the hooker to say, if we play our game plan, we'll win. I just feel like there's a middle ground where you can kind of be confident without being
tricky to be that nuanced. Though. So remember, not everyone there has got media training, and not everyone there.
They all have got media training.
No, they haven't. That's not media training. Media training is properly understanding how you acknowledge, bridge to it where you want to get to, and control the narrative. That's really, really difficult to do for some people who are under pressure. Sub hooker for Scotland is not going to have had very in-depth, media training. I'm going to stop you there. So look, some of these guys are going to say something blunt and something that maybe isn't, perfectly nuanced. I honestly would. There's.
But Gregor Townsend is constantly.
Yeah, Gregor Townsend he's got to show some kind of belief too, in his team. I think it hasn't worked for him in previous years. I agree. I think he's kind of a guy who has talked up his teams previously. You would much rather, a more balanced answer would be something like, we obviously have Ireland are an excellent team. They're number one ranked. We haven't got a good history, but there are areas where they have struggled, and we will look to target them. And I think if we do that on enough occasions, we could come out, on top in this game. We obviously believe we can do that internally, but it's a massive challenge. But you don't always have to say that. And I think as a media person, now that I'm a media person, quite like having something to discuss like that, a direct enough answer saying, yeah, we believe we can do it if we play well. It's pretty simple, but it's kind of the same. It's kind of the same answer, isn't it?
Yeah. Look, I'm not. It's not as if Gregor Townsend is making a Joe Namath kind of, I guarantee a win, this weekend or anything like that. I just find when you haven't actually delivered on winning a Six Nations or getting close to winning a Six Nations, I just think it would be more helpful publicly to be a little more measured and a little more humble, I would say. And Jonathan, I want to ask you this. I'd push back on the notion that all the pressure's on Ireland. Finn Russell said the same, reading quotes from him today. He basically said, we've nothing to lose this weekend. I find that
you do. You're going home.
You're going home. This is the best Scotland squad to go to a World Cup since Gavin Hastings in the 90s. The idea that it's a free shot and all the pressure's on Ireland. Ireland can lose and still go into the quarterfinals. So the idea that Scotland have nothing to lose, I find that I don't agree with that at all. I feel like the pressure, especially the way they've been talking, is at least equal on both teams going into this weekend.
I think there's huge pressure on Scotland, and I think the mental burden of this fixture will weigh a lot heavier on Scotland than it should do on Ireland. I'd much rather be Gary Keegan this week than his counterpart in Scotland. There's an awful lot of the narrative around this game has been, are Ireland going to get complacent? like, we have no reason to believe that Ireland are going to get complacent, in the sense that Ireland haven't got beaten by a side that they shouldn't have got beaten by since Wales in the Six Nations, when O'Mahony had the red card. That was like 2.5 years ago. Whereas Scotland have developed a sort of mental block around playing Ireland, and that creates a huge amount of pressure. It's the same as, whenever Ireland couldn't beat New Zealand for 111 years, like, the pressure mounts during those games, because if you're on the cusp of doing it, if you're on the cusp of doing something so substantial, which is getting to the quarterfinals of a World Cup and knocking off the number one side in the world to do it, and beating a side that have this sort of hoodoo over you, there's an amazing amount of pressure in the game. And I think that's much more likely to play a big part in this game than the idea that Ireland have got ahead of themselves and are looking beyond Scotland to a quarterfinal, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting debate. Just on the Rassie comments as well, like, for people who were listening who haven't heard him, he basically said he'd much rather, he was like, without being arrogant, I want to preface this by saying I'm not being arrogant here, but he basically said he'd rather be in South Africa's position now, a 2-week break to the quarterfinals, even though they might be knocked out if there's mad kind of permutations come to pass, than be in Ireland's position despite having beaten South Africa, basically needing a result against Scotland to progress. Like, what do you think about that kind of notion?
I don't know what he's trying to do. Sometimes it's hard to kind of figure out. My issues around Rassie. Sometimes I think he probably gets away with it because he's got such a strong player group. Just around some of the logic and the decision making, I think they were are paying for some of those decisions that they made around the squad selection before the tournament, particularly against Ireland. There was some kind of bloopers there around the bench selection and some very, very odd decisions in key skill positions that cost them in the game. I think no place kicker, no proven place kicker anyway, and no line out, no second line out thrower option is madness. So they could have won that game against Ireland. They didn't, and then they didn't get the ball. Like, they didn't put Tonga to the sword. Really, needed was a 35-point win and didn't get that. Ended up as a 31, I think. So. Yeah, I don't know what he's talking about, to be honest. I think they've left open a small gap, having had a great start, beating Scotland 18-3. They got off to a really good start, and I think he's trying to throw in some kind of grenade there. I think it'll have no impact, and people will just completely disregard it. I think he still sounds like he's an excellent coach, an excellent motivator, man manager, but I think his squad selections have left a lot to be desired, and I think he's nervous, and that's what that is. I think he's actually nervous about the situation. He's left a small window where his team, a brilliant rugby team that should be a real threat in this competition, might conceivably go out of the competition in the group stages. So I think he's nervous.
Yeah, well,
I took it to mean that, like, you'd rather be in South Africa's position than Ireland this weekend, which, is that not true? Like, is it not more likely that Ireland go out this weekend than South Africa do, given that to knock South Africa out requires a very unlikely result? Like, it's more likely that Scotland beat Ireland by 6 points than it is that Scotland beat Ireland by 21 points and Ireland score 4 tries. Is it not now?
Not based on the recent history, I don't think. I think Ireland's record against Scotland is pretty good. I just feel like he's nervous about his own situation, I think.
But taking it at face value, like, as in, basically the scenarios are: would you rather have an off week this week going into a quarter-final, almost definitely going into a quarter-final, or would you rather have a game that, like Ireland do, which is borderline, a must-win for the most part? Like, obviously, there's permutations Ireland could go through. Would you rather have a must-win game this weekend and then your quarter-final the week afterwards, or a week off and then a quarter-final?
They've got to go and sit and watch, and however inconceivable that is, it's completely out of their control. So they could go out of this tournament like sitting on their couch at home. Whereas, like, I'd rather be playing and remember, if things go as planned, and based on recent history, we're all expecting Ireland to go ahead and do this. Then they have to go and play the world champs in the quarter-final. And
France in the world quarter-final.
France. Sorry, not the world champs. Sorry, France, the home team in the Rugby World Cup in the quarter-final. A bloody tough task. It looks like Dupont is going to be back for that one too. So yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. I think he's like, why even bother commenting on it? I suppose he's asked the question maybe, but to me, I'd be nervous sitting there. Even if it is an unlikely scenario.
Yeah, I enjoyed that he's following only 2 Twitter accounts today, the Irish team and the Scottish team. I'm not sure if he manages it all, but whoever's managing it on his behalf, to be fair, he does a good job.
What's his other one? What's his...
what was it? Jacko? Oh, I can't remember. Yeah, I can't remember the name. His burner account during the Lions tour. The name escapes me. I think it was Jacko something or other. But We could look that up afterwards.
He's an eclectic man, and he is very entertaining. It seems like a good bloke, but I just kind of disregard everything he says in the media. He's kind of odd enough in terms of those responses and things.
But on the kicking point, like Andre Pollard would look good off the tee against Tonga, to be fair. I think kicked 6 from 6. I'd be interested to see now if he starts them in the quarter.
He has to. Like, I think their attack stuttered a little bit, but you'd expect that with someone coming in. And Libbok is good in fairness. He's a real threat himself, which does help. And got great pace and footwork. But no, look, I think Pollard is the guy for them. I think he's stronger defensively as well. And I expect them to get the attack up and running pretty quickly. Pollard has had so little rugby. And look, the kicking off the tee, it just decides it straight away. If you're playing 10-man rugby, with 6-2 splits on your bench, he's your guy to get you over the line. And he makes you stingier defensively, as I mentioned. So that's a good thing for them that he's back in. And I think the next injury, as I said, is going to be another hooker coming out. And I think they're probably...
Well, they already brought in Am. They could have potentially brought in a hooker after Mapimpi got injured. But
but Am is special, I think. But I think it's got to be a hooker next, and I think that probably might sort out their problems. Issue for them is it might be too late against, having to play France, which is probably the most likely scenario.
Yeah, bringing in Am, I'm kind of like, he's an unbelievable player, obviously.
But he's a world player. He was in the top 6 of the world.
Hasn't played though since,
He's special, and I think that, like, if you think about what's at 13 currently, it's a stopgap for him. It's someone who doesn't play there all the time as well, really. So a pure 13 makes a big difference for you.
And to be fair, the last time he played was the same weekend of Jack Conan's last game. So like that, it's his first appearance in the World Cup coming up as well. So like if it's good enough to have Jack Conan there, I don't see why Am can't.
I agree.
Actually slot back in as well. Jonathan, in terms of the Ireland or Scotland game, anything jumping out to you in terms of selection? I know we discussed it a little bit last week in terms of potential changes. Myself and Luke were just chatting about it off air before we came on as well about who might come in. Who are you expecting to come in, if anyone, into the starting team or onto the bench?
Well, it's probably just in terms of what we talked about to open, of the closer this game gets and the, I suppose, more you reckon with the possibility that Ireland's World Cup could end this weekend. I'm probably less inclined to make changes than I probably was this time last week whenever we were talking. But I think Ireland are coming at it from a huge position of strength, because if you look at the players that they could bring in, Henshaw, Conan, Murray, Henderson, I wouldn't expect to see all of those guys plus Sheehan as well. Those are 5 players that you can bring in a combination of without weakening the team. Like, I don't think there's an awful lot of teams in this competition that have that luxury of being able to make those changes without significantly weakening your team in any position. I think we need to see Sheehan and we need to see Conan, because they're going to be big parts of the knockout stages for Ireland should they get there. And we haven't seen enough rugby from them. I think you can possibly put Henderson and Henshaw into that mix as well. Guys that just haven't either had a lot of minutes or haven't had minutes against the quality of opposition that they're going to need going into a quarterfinal, semi-final or a final. But I think you're probably talking about maybe 2 of those 5 coming in possibly. And as I say, you're able to do that without weakening your team, and it should still more than be enough against Scotland.
Yeah, we were talking about the hooker kind of selection issue, or not issue, the kind of decision off air. You were saying you would probably stick with Kelleher. I was saying I'd bring in Sheehan because he hasn't played much rugby. What's your thought process around sticking with Kelleher, given that, as Jonathan mentioned, Sheehan will be a huge part of any knockout campaign?
Yeah, look, I suppose I just thought that I think it's safer with Sheehan's injury maybe to give him 30 minutes, and I'd love to see Kelleher just given a chance to settle the throwing down and have a good 50 minutes or 45 minutes of throwing. I think that positions you really well for later in the competition as well. I think it's harder for him if he has to come in under pressure to deliver on the throwing again, and he'd be nervous doing that, whereas I think he has a chance to have 1 or 2 bad ones and get it right for 30 minutes, if you get me, like have 5 or 6 ones after that where he goes, okay, we've got the timing down, we fixed that issue, we're good. We know Sheehan's come in and been excellent at the line-out, so we know, I think, that he's in a good place with his throwing. And I just think, as I said, the injury thing with him, I'd just like to see another 30 minutes, and then you go, okay, well, because let's face it, you want to get him fit, but remember, he's probably only really got to get fit for 50 or 60 minutes. You nearly always bring in someone for, in one of those, in that hooker position for 20 minutes at least of a game, and I think that's probably generous. I think it's probably more like 30 minutes. So it's not a stretch for him to have to play another 20 minutes. So I think 30 minutes is good for him this weekend. I think it sets him up nicely to play the 50 minutes. And I think you do start him in the quarterfinal. I think the form he's shown, I think he's just a little bit more dynamic, I think, at this point than Kelleher. I think Kelleher still seems to be recovering slightly from injuries, had an injury-ravaged couple of years. And Sheehan does deserve to get his place back. But I would just give him one more chance for all those reasons I mentioned. I completely understand the other point of view where you don't want to take a chance, and you did see what Kelleher brought in terms of the lineup when he came on. However, I think there was more to it than just the throwing. I think that the calling and the Ireland lineout and generally kind of settled down a little bit. After that initial shock of first kind of 6 missed ones was very demoralising. So that's an interesting one. Conan coming in. I mean, Baird was excellent. Like, I think the two obvious ones are Conan onto the bench, and Sheehan into the team. I don't know what you guys think.
I feel like Conan is 100% going to come in. Why keep him this long? Because if he doesn't play this weekend, I feel like you've carried him the entire tournament.
Well, where do you bring it's onto the bench? Obviously,
instead of Baird. Yeah, I would say
instead of Baird. Do you think? Yeah. No. I completely. Yeah. I ain't going to fight you on it. But I just think Baird actually brought. He brought good energy. And he's a big athlete, I just like having him there. I think he's, he's kind of a bit kind of raw, isn't he, in terms of his talent? But he's a physical specimen. And I do like having him there. I think he's nice to have in that 6 slot too, where you can just, and he's nice to have the other option for second row, just in case there's kind of a weird scenario in there, Will. So I don't like seeing him leave, but I agree with you. I think that's probably what lots of people will be thinking, is that why bring Conan otherwise? But, Conan's the kind of guy that you could have a straight swap as well, so you could have him outside your 23. If there's an injury to Doris, you say, okay, well, there's my ready-made replacement. So,
but having not played no rugby, though, you want to get minutes into those.
Yeah, no, there is that side of things. But
the August Bank Holiday weekend was when he last played. Like, that's
no, it is a long time. No, I completely get the logic on it. It's just whether you take someone out of a key game who actually has been playing well and been making an impact from the bench.
Yeah. Jonathan, I want to throw a flyer at you. We were talking about South Africa calling up various positions regardless of who gets injured. If Ireland suffer an injury this weekend, no matter who it is there a case to be made for bringing Cian Healy over? He says he's fit, ready to go. Dave Kilcoyne, is a good player, but you saw Andrew Porter going 75 minutes against South Africa. Was there an argument for getting that experience, over into France? As we said, if it could be a long knockout campaign, so even though he hasn't played much rugby, he might end up featuring it if that was the case. Would that be a worthwhile option, do you think?
It depends on the injury, but absolutely, I think it would be worth thinking about, because that's the way that, as we stand now, you would get your first choice match day 23 into what could be the biggest series of games that there have ever been in Irish rugby. So I think it would definitely be worth exploring, but I think it's very, you mentioned Conan and not having played. Like, to me, it's more interesting that he hasn't played, given that Farrell decided against bringing the extra back rower. So he's brought Stuart McCluskey, he's not played him, but he's ostensibly brought Stuart McCluskey at the expense of Cian Prendergast, really, that extra back rower. So he's gone through a month of this tournament with only 4 back rowers. So, if you get an injury there, say, then you're very short. But if you were to get an injury in the midfield, maybe, you could get away with bringing Cian Healy in then. And I do think there would be value in that, because you're strengthening your match day 23, if that's the case. And that, I think, would be very hard to turn down if you had the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, what do you think? Yeah,
look, I think Cian, all that experience, I think... you look at the Eddie Jones experience. I'm kind of going off on a bit of a tangent here, but he brought no experience over. You need guys who've done it. Like, that kind of experience is absolutely invaluable. And I think while Porter is a supreme athlete, asking him to kind of go, between 70 and 80 minutes every week for 4 or 5 in a row, we all hope. Not feasible. Not feasible, I don't think. Sorry, 4 will be max. But it's... if you get a chance to bring him over, they probably should do that. It is tricky to see. Like, I do think there's a little bit of risk around that back row situation.
It all depends on who would get injured.
Exactly, and it's really difficult to anticipate. Ideally, but ideally it would be a straight swap. That kind of way you get someone.
Ideally,
I obviously did caveat. It's an awful way of saying it, but ideally you wouldn't be bringing him in for a kind of a different position. You're kind of keeping the balance that the squad has already, and it would be, you kind of keep the plan that you went over with in terms of who comes in where. I do agree with Jonathan. There is like that issue around the back row that we all kind of discussed, and it's such an attritional kind of area of the pitch. That is somewhere where there's a little bit of concern. They might look a little bit light, but the other area of concern is definitely around that front row and how much pressure is on Porter to go ahead and finish every single game nearly, or definitely the key parts of every game. So Keane looked great. I don't know if you saw the footage on his Instagram. He was obviously putting that out for a good reason.
Come and get me, please.
He did say it to me actually, because I sent him obviously a text saying, listen, hard luck or whatever, and he did say it to me. I was like, don't count me out yet. I don't know if I said it to you or Ruds, I'm not sure, but I was going to say, and I was actually talking to him, I think he might get back. Which is, as I said to him, was like, you still have a bit of that Phoenix blood kind of flowing around the body. So unbelievable recovery from him at his age, and great to see him back. And it's a great option for Ireland should there be a
you never know. Like the last World Cup, England ended up calling up a scrum half who came onto the bench before the World Cup final, Ben Spencer. Like, so, at any stage of the tournament, no matter how, like if Ireland go all the way, or if, you never know, like he could still be called upon, even if it's only to sub in one match potentially. You never know how it could work out. Jonathan, you mentioned Stuart McCluskey there. I was going to actually ask about him anyway. Like, he's kind of one of the forgotten men. I think himself and Jimmy O'Brien are the only two guys who haven't featured for a minute in this World Cup so far. I think I'm right in saying that. Like, how good did
as well, but Conan.
Oh yeah, sorry. Presuming Conan features this weekend, yeah. But like, it's been a very disappointing tournament. Obviously, another child he welcomed in, so it's been bittersweet from that point of view. But from a rugby point of view, for him not to get any minutes, you probably would have expected him to play one of the first two matches. But obviously, the way Andy Farrell picked his team, that didn't come to pass. Like, how kind of gutting will it be for Stuart McCluskey not to have featured up to this point? I'd
say it would be devastating. Like, all these guys are going to come out with saying the right things and saying that they're contributing to the team during the week, and it's a 33-man effort, not a 23-man effort. But at the end of the day, as a rugby player going to a World Cup, you're there to play. And the fact of the matter is that in previous World Cups, everybody that's went has played. You're going back, I think, to 2007, the last time Ireland brought somebody to a World Cup without using them. So I think if you were picked in that squad, absolutely you're expecting to play. But I think it speaks to Andy Farrell, and what Andy Farrell has consistently said throughout his tenure here is that, he's not giving away caps. He's not going to use somebody at a World Cup so that he can say that he used them. And I think that's part of what he's tried to instill in this team. That ethos is what he's tried to instill in this team. And maybe the writing was on the wall with that Romania game when he went so strong in the Romania game, because I think a lot of people would have been looking at that one as the fixture to say, as much as it was the first game and you want to lay down a marker and you want to sort of state your intention in the opening weekend, like that was the fixture that you would have expected to see the other sort of 10 players in the squad that aren't in the match day 23. That's when you would have expected to see those guys get their game. And maybe it's just the way the fixtures fell with that being first that meant that didn't happen. But I mean, absolutely, if you're once you're on that plane, you think you're going to see the pitch. So to not do it's a big personal blow. Like, obviously, if Ireland go on and win the thing, he gets a medal. Like, I don't think he would rather be at home playing for Ulster than in France not playing for Ireland. But it's a tough thing to deal with.
It's tough for him with the child at home. I think it'll make it kind of doubly tough for you not getting it's probably easier in your own mind if you say, well, look, I'm doing something special. But look, I think he's a kind of a good fella as well. Shu seems like a positive guy, very well liked, brilliant player, been playing very well for a long time. I think he's suffered because, look, there's obviously two brilliant players ahead of him. He obviously is a specialist in that he pretty much purely plays 12, which is a challenge. I think it's a massive vote of confidence in his ability that he's actually there, though. And I think if there is an injury, you saw how he played against South Africa. He, in a very tough match in November, he actually was excellent in that game. So, look, it's good that he's there. I think it's a good vote of confidence in his ability and what he's done to this point. He's probably suffered a bit because Ulster haven't played well either, let's face it. And Bundy has come into a really rich vein of form. So, I get Jonathan's point, but he still has might well have a big part to play in this tournament. I think it's been this weekend, especially, like that's a real tough centre partnership that, like, probably Scotland's best part of their team, I think, is probably that centre partnership. You could well see an injury or two in that area. Gary's had a few injuries here and there as well. So, Robbie is pretty much the straight swap in there. I think he is anyway. I mean, I know Jimmy did play there, but I think, Henshaw goes in there. And then all of a sudden, you're right in the picture, aren't you, if you're Stu McCluskey. So, this thing is not out of reach yet. He has to stay, focused, which I'm sure he will, train really well, prepare the team well, because if he prepares the team well, another match could be an injury and you're in the game. So I think I agree it's tough, but got to keep focused now.
And interesting, Jonathan's point about how Andy Farrell has used this World Cup to where he's used pretty much every international window. He's gone with almost his strongest team every week. Like, I haven't researched this because it's only come to my head now, but like Ireland must have used the fewest players almost of any team in the tournament. Just you think of how little the team has actually changed across the 3 games. There's been little tweaks here and there, but they've basically gone with their strongest team. I know the first game you had McCarthy and Keith Earls, but like it was basically as strong a team as he could pick for.
It means he really wants you there. You know, if you got picked in that 33, he thinks you're a good guy. He thinks you're someone he can rely on because he doesn't give away any matches. Like if you're playing Ireland, you know, within reason, some of the tier 2s and 3s, he might pick fairly, a different team. But generally speaking, he's picked, even for the November internationals, he picked the strongest team, every week, which I think is a big vote of confidence in anyone who's there. And they should take it as that. And I think he trusts them. And that's why they're there. So, look, I don't really see a problem with it. I kind of like that the team is kind of battle hardened to a certain extent. I always have that concern with the Irish rugby model that, coming to something like a World Cup where you're kind of rested nearly every 3 weeks you usually play about 3 games. And I know they have some very strong data around injuries to support pulling people out after 3 games. Apparently the chances of getting injured in the 4th game spike massively. So that's why they do it. But it does mean at a tournament like this where it's kind of attritional and you're there for a long time, it means, are you really used to that? Are you used to having that grueling schedule? Can you back it up for that amount of time without getting tired? It's always a concern I have, which I think Andy Farrell seems like he probably shares it. I think somewhere in there he shares that feeling.
But Jonathan, is there a concern then? Obviously the injury profile has been so good so far that if there is an injury and Ireland do progress, that some of the guys coming in are a bit undercooked because he has gone with basically the same team every week. Obviously we don't know what team he's picking this weekend, but it appears that it's going to be along similar lines to South Africa.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I think that we're having this conversation around Sheehan and Conan. It's not so much do they need minutes against Scotland, it's do they need minutes before they get to the quarterfinal. And then there's guys that are in the same boat. Say a back 3 player gets injured and then Jimmy O'Brien is asked to play a quarterfinal of the World Cup. It's the biggest game of his life, but he also hasn't played a game since August. That's a big ask, and there is definitely a risk there. But obviously in Farrell's mind, the risk of that is smaller than the risk of not going at this World Cup full throttle and playing your strongest team or close to your strongest team in every game. Because let's be honest, it hasn't been required. Yes, points difference may still come into it, but they didn't need that strong a team to beat Romania or Tonga.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting debate, and as we said, when he picks a team for Scotland on Thursday, we'll know a bit more about his intentions, but by all intents and purposes, it looks like he is going to go with as strong a team as he can. Let's move tack for a little bit. New Zealand, are they back after that big win on Friday, Luke? I was in a few WhatsApp groups, everyone soiling themselves out with fear after seeing New Zealand run in all those points against Italy. What are your thoughts? Do you look at that game and think, oh, they're really humming, or was it more how poor Italy were and made them look a bit better?
Option 2. I thought Italy were atrocious, and having kind of felt like they'd made a little bit of progress under Crowley, I just feel like the defensive performance was just pathetic, actually, at times. So, look, New Zealand can do that to you. I just don't think this is a vintage New Zealand team. I just think, I was amazed at how bad the ball handling was. I was chatting to, I think it was my father actually, we were chatting about the France-New Zealand game. We were just kind of sharing some thoughts, and he had kind of said it, and I thought, you know what, you're 100% right. I remember seeing Bowden Barrett throw some real wobbly passes and people not catching it, people getting the ball dragged out of their hands and tackled. I've just never seen New Zealand teams like that. I always think, yes, they generally have brilliant athletes, great finishers, but what I always think about New Zealand is that, aside from retaining the ball brilliantly, they pass the ball outstandingly well, better than any team in the world. And I think that's where Ireland have actually overtaken them, is that 1 to 15 on the pitch, no matter who it is, can pass the ball. This New Zealand team don't look like they have that well. I think they look a little bit different. They look shaky. Their technique, passing-wise, their catching, basic skills, not as good as they always are. You always thought New Zealand, their basic skills are better than any other team. Look, they look great against Italy, but I thought they were made to look great. And I think against the big teams, I still think at this juncture that team is probably behind South Africa, France and Ireland. I do think that. And look, they still obviously will be a threat. And I'm always worried about a team that has Joe Schmidt in the back room. We talked about this all over 3 weeks to prepare. I know you were talking about kind of his Ireland reign and that, but I still think he is a winner. And And everywhere he's gone, he's been pretty much a success, bar at World Cups. With Ireland, obviously.
He got a World Cup now?
No, but I just think everywhere he's gone, they get a chance to prepare really, really well for Ireland. New Zealand are generally at the forefront of rugby thinking. Haven't been maybe in the last year or two, but I can see them coming up with a really good game plan to play Ireland if it plays out as we expect and Ireland get the win and go through top of the group. So I am concerned about them, but not because of the Italy performance.
Yeah, because in the last 2 years, going back to the autumn of 2021, when the All Blacks have played weaker teams, they've still been able to put them to the sword pretty comprehensively. They trounced Wales last autumn, put a load of points on Australia and Argentina, and the Rugby Championship's gone. Obviously, the Italian performance, but since November 2021, they've lost by double digits 3 times to Ireland, twice to France, and twice to South Africa. So when they've made that step up.
I think their front row is a problem for them, Will.
They made that step up to the top 3 teams in the world. Yeah. They've actually been a good bit off the level required. That's 7 double-digit defeats in 2 years. That would be unthinkable. They wouldn't even suffer 7 defeats in the previous 10 probably, but let alone double-digit defeats.
I think if you think about the 3 teams that I mentioned there, that I think that are quite a bit better. I think where they have real problems, is in that front row. I can't see them competing with any 3 of those teams, and I don't think, as good as Cody Taylor is, I think anyone.
Not what he was in the Lions.
He's not what he was. Completely agree with you. And I think he's just not as dynamic. You think about how dynamic all the other hookers are. Obviously Mark's going home is probably a help, but I still think the props, particularly not vintage. You think about the Franks brothers. Some brilliant players that have played for New Zealand there over the years. Those guys are not like that. Poor hands. Not even great at scrum time, which I think New Zealand traditionally weren't, but have in the last 15 years been very, very good at scrum time. Still think their back 5 is pretty good, but still back row is not what it was either. And I think Ireland have a big advantage in those 2 areas against them, as I think South Africa and France do. And I think that's probably why it might be just a bridge too far for them to beat those teams. Even if they have a brilliant plan, I still think they won't be favourites. You never think you're going to say that about New Zealand, but that is, I think, a fact at this point. And it's kind of a weird one because you think of how much quality they have. They just don't seem to have developed or timed this run in brilliantly to the World Cup, I think, in terms of who's there. And I think they still have some issues around selecting that 10 slot, even though I think they have decided that it's Mo'unga. It's taken them quite a while to get there. And Barrett at 15, because he's such a great player and has all that experience, I know why he's there. It's important to have that at a World Cup. But is he their best 15? I don't know. And you kind of have to have him in your team. So they're in a tricky slot, New Zealand. I feel like there's been a lot of indecision about their selections and about how they want to play. And I think they're just not what they were. They will come back quickly, I think, in the next World Cup cycle. But this one, I think, has come a little too soon for them. I don't know what you guys think.
Yeah, Jonathan, do you want to come in on that? What are your thoughts on New Zealand, especially after last Friday?
Yeah, look, we've sort of had this for about, probably about a year and a half since that Ireland series. It feels like every game that New Zealand play is like an 80-minute referendum on whether they're any good or not. And it's like, are they the team that stuck 97 on Italy, or are they the team that got beat by France? Are they the team that got thumped by the Springboks? Are they the team that won the Rugby Championship? And the obvious answer is that they are all of these teams, because it's exactly what you said there. They've always been capable of putting this amount of points on a bad team that doesn't want to defend. The thing that they lack now is they don't have the consistency. This isn't the team that was able to reel off 18 wins in a row not that long ago, because they have bad performances in them, and they have days where, we've seen them against Ireland, we've seen them against South Africa, going back to last autumn, we've seen them against France, and they just don't look like they have the horses up front to match those sides. Like, to me, that game was more about Italy. Like, the curious part of Friday night was how bad Italy were, how it looked essentially like, obviously we know Kieran Carley's leaving at the end of this tournament. We know that, look, they still have a chance of the quarterfinals if they beat France, but they've got a particularly tough draw, and they didn't really look particularly committed to defending anyway for once that game on Friday. Not even once it got away from them. Once they gave up 2 scores, that looked like it was it for them. Like, I think it said a lot more about Italy and where Italy are with a coach that's leaving at the end of the campaign, and by all accounts, maybe a few players wanted him to stay on, and I just don't think it says an awful lot about New Zealand, or I suppose more accurately, it doesn't say an awful lot about New Zealand's ability to beat one of the other top 4 sides in the world.
What does it say about the tournament generally? Like, there's been 32 pool matches. Only 6 of the 32 matches have been decided by 7 points or less, and only 8 of them, so only a quarter, have been decided by 14 points or less. So within two scores. Like, last weekend in particular was like a dire fixture list. Like, New Zealand Italy was the marquee game of the weekend, really. Like, in terms of just the biggest one, and like that was an outrageous turkey shoot. Like, and now there's talk about expanding the tournament to 24 teams for the next edition. Like, the next 4 teams in the world ranking would be USA, Spain, Canada, and Hong Kong, China coming to the party. Like what? Like, is there merit in that? Like, there's been so many outrageously one-sided games in this tournament.
Well, I think you've got to give the tier 2 nations more games in between against better opposition. That's a huge challenge for them. You know, you think about, particularly, I think some of the Pacific Island nations have had so few games. Like, it looks like Tonga are now only coming up to speed at this stage of the competition. You know, they've barely had any matches. I think that I read a stat, was it something like 15 games or something between now and the last World Cup together or something like that? I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure it's not too many more.
As well, like, you know.
Yeah, of course, and they were disproportionate. Yes. They were kind of impacted by that.
For 2 years with COVID.
Yeah. So look, no, there is a bit of that going on, but still, 20 matches is probably not enough, or whatever it was, for you to really get a sense of what direction the team is pulling, and to kind of get combinations together, things like that. So look, they're just one example, but I do think if you are going to do it, you have to give them more opportunities to play against the best teams. There will be a few turkey shoots, but like, at some point we've got to try and make this expand our game, I think, and I think it's a good thing to have them.
The extra teams.
I do. I think Portugal have been very good, in the competition. I think Fiji traditionally, they are a traditional rugby nation, but they still have a very small pool to pick from. Some brilliant athletes, we obviously know, but they've been brilliant in the World Cup. Obviously disappointing, that they're kind of, it's all up in the air a little bit now, and when they should have been kind of home and hose, really, in their group, haven't had, such been so close against Wales. I just think, you still have to try and give these teams an opportunity, but you just have to do it a bit more fairly as well. I think they've done that with the fixture list. I think in the last World Cup and the previous World Cup, some of the fixture lists were awful for some of the tier 2 nations, with less guys to pick from, less time to prepare. They had, less recovery time even between the games. So that's improved a little bit as well, which I think is a good thing. You never like seeing massive scorelines, but I think you're just going to have to accept that here and there. It's not a worldwide game like football is.
Then why is it being expanded? I feel like it would.
You got to try and make it a world. I think you've got to try and do that. I think the endeavour is right. Whether or not we get some ugly results, I think is that is something that we're probably just going to have to live with for a little while, I think. But you never grow the game unless it's on a world stage,
Jonathan, is it like putting the cart before the horse? Should it not be like the kind of a prerequisite to get teams up to the standard required to be at a World Cup before we start adding 4 more teams? Like 24 teams in a game that's only probably played to a good standard by 8. It seems kind of like, for your worldwide product, your global showpiece. I just even though the structure would be 6 pools of 4 teams on a last 16, which would make more knockout rugby, which it would be the same amount of games as this World Cup, just with an extra knockout game, which could be exciting. But in terms of the expansion, what are your thoughts on that?
I'm not against expansion, but there's no point in doing it unless you work between the cycles. It's exactly what Luke's saying, because we have this debate every 4 years, and it's not like, are the teams that are going to be the 21st, 22nd, 23rd, 24th teams good enough for the World Cup? Like, the debate is really, are the teams that are 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th and 20th good enough for the World Cup now? And the answer to that is no, because there's a reason that you have a 33-point on average winning margin in these games. Like, that's not going to sell your product. So we talk about growing the game. You can't grow the game if the games themselves are substandard. And nobody who's a neutral, and even people who are invested in the game, want to watch games like that. So the issue is that we can't just have this conversation every 4th October whenever we're slogging through the pool stages and we've all got to the point where we don't want to see any more of these games that are settled by 50 points. Like, you need to put in the work in the interim in the cycle. Like, we can't have this debate now and then forget about it.
And I do think, John, I don't know what you think about this, but the Georgia example to me is perfect at this World Cup, where they've been really they've been a bit disappointing, I think. And we were all expecting, they had a few really good results here and there, and we're kind of saying, like, that's brilliant. Like, let's see how they go on. They could be a potential banana skin at this World Cup, particularly in that group. the stuff between the cycles for them, how have they not been included in kind of a Six Nations or an expanded? Obviously, it'd be a Seven Nations, but how have they not been included in something like that? Or a club team from there been set up that is kind of in the
URC.
Oh yeah, exactly, the URC. Things like that are what you have to do to bring these places along. The problem for them, I think, is probably rugby's been under massive pressure since COVID. Financially, it's never really recovered. We're seeing obviously what's going on in the UK at the moment over there. So it is hard to go ahead and do that. Hopefully things settle down over this World Cup cycle, and we can try and integrate these teams a little bit better. But there's literally, I don't think there's any point in adding them if you're not going to make the effort through the cycle. That's absolutely key. You've got to try and find them fixtures. You've got to try and find club games for them whereby they have an opportunity, like a Georgian team in the European Cup or the Challenge Cup or something as well. You need to find routes for these players to play against better players. They will never improve otherwise.
Yeah, I don't work for rugby, so it's not my job to grow the game. I would rather see a good World Cup with less turkey shoots. 16 teams would be preferable for me to 24 in some ways, because
a good World Cup does grow the game. That's the thing that gets lost in all of this. Like, a good World Cup is imperative to growing the game because this is the biggest seller of the game. Like, rugby is fortunate in the sense that the Six Nations remains on terrestrial TV and that's protected, but this is a huge shop window essentially for World Rugby to attract new fans. And if you were watching a lot of those games over the weekend, are you going to watch them, or are you going to switch over and watch the Ryder Cup? Are you going to watch them, or are you going to switch over and watch Spurs against Liverpool? Those types of games are not growing the game, so it's balancing those things.
Even if you think about the Football World Cup though, it's last 16 is where you really start tuning in, no?
Disagree completely. The group stages of the Football World Cup are because obviously in soccer, a weak team can score a goal and get a result against the head. Namibia can never beat New Zealand no matter what happens. I know Japan once beat South Africa, but World Cup shocks happen all the time in the Football World Cup. You see Germany getting turfed out, they lost to Japan. There's World Cup shocks galore every Football World Cup. It's not comparable, I don't think.
No, but you're still going to be glued to, there's two groups where you're glued to the last fixture of this World Cup. You know what I mean? To see what happens. You know what I mean? So I think there's plenty of fixtures, and then you're every quarter final, you're going to be, there's going to be every eyeball that has any kind of interest in rugby is going to be watching the quarterfinals. I think, and I think
it's a 5-week pool stage to get to that stage.
You think it should be quicker with less recovery time?
As I said, 6 games out of 32 have been decided by one score. That's mad.
No, it's not enough. I do agree.
20%.
We've also had a few disappointing ones from teams that should have come on a little bit better, I think, Will.
That's true, yeah.
So, I think there's been a few disappointing ones in that sense. But I still think there's going to be enough interest that there's going to be some great fixtures. The Scotland-Ireland game is going to be an absolute belter of a game. It is going to be, two sides honing into each other, I think. And it's going to be really tense. And I think if you look at all those quarterfinal fixtures, once you get to knockout rugby, there's going to be...
And the business end will be unbelievable.
It'll be brilliant,
But, it's not just, adding another 4 team, it's in,
Well, I suppose the real question about it, Will, is why you need the bye week. In that, could you do it all in 4 weeks? You probably should be able to do it.
Well, with this new schedule, that's what they're saying. To have 6 pools of 4 instead of 4 pools of 5, you can actually do it. So every team is playing every weekend. Yeah. So it'll actually shorten the tournament. Ironically, by adding more teams, it'll actually shorten the tournament by a week because they won't need the bye week because there'll be even number of teams in every pool. So
it does feel like a long time to get to the quarters for what it is.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the real problem. So it's not about whether we have another 4 good team or 4 teams that are good enough to be at this tournament. The bigger problem is exactly what we're talking about. Everyone will be into it once we get to the quarterfinals. It's too long to get to the quarterfinals. So as big a problem about getting another 4 teams into the tournament is really creating another 4 teams that could make the quarterfinals. What Will says to start this conversation is bang on. We're a month into this tournament, and what was it to really achieve? It wasn't to turn 20 teams into 8. It was really to turn 9 or 10 teams into 8. That's the issue. You need all of the teams beyond the very, very top tier to get better, not 21 to 24. You need 10 to 24 to be better to improve the quality of the World Cup.
And I think it's a pipe dream for that, really. World Rugby can say it as much as they want, but I can't foresee there ever being a time where the majority of these teams are even remotely competitive at a World Cup. And it sounds really kind of snobby, like pulling up the the ladder and closing the trap door behind them. But like as I said, it's not my job to grow the game. I'm just talking about it as a consumer, someone who's like watches rugby. Like I just feel like they're chasing pipe dreams. Like as you said, the finances are barely robust enough to support the countries rugby is going well in, let alone trying to spread it out and make it massive in America and make it massive in other countries. Like sometimes I'm like, would they be better off consolidating where it's actually popular?
Yeah, no, but I think if you're doing that, right? So to my mind, if you're doing that, it shouldn't really be a World Cup. It should just be like a competition every 2 years. The
Super Bowl, they're world champions.
No, sorry, but I think it should be like a Ryder Cup style. We just talked about Ryder Cup style. It should probably be something like that, where it's every 2 years. Would be kind of how I would do it, if you ask me honestly, because I kind of agree with you, but I also think the endeavour is good to try and grow it. The issue for me is not actually organising to have more teams at the World Cup. The issue for me is what happens between them. That is the big issue in the game, is that you haven't given these people an actual opportunity to grow their game and to be exposed to better players, better coaching. It's as simple as that. So it's good that they're trying to do it, but if you don't give them the opportunities in between that, you should change it from being a World Cup, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't disagree, because the people have said, Portugal have been the real joy, probably success story of the kind of the minnows, if you want to call them that. They drew with Georgia, they threw the ball around really well against Australia. But what happens to those players? Some of those guys look like, I was joking with people, surely a lot of French clubs will be on the phone to their agents because they look like they can play even in the Pro D2. But what happens to these guys? Some of them have been really lighting up the tournament with some great footwork, some lovely tries. It's kind of like a mystery now, who these players are, where they'll go, or what'll happen to them. So, as you say, it's about that infrastructure. And Jonathan, you made the good point about it being the shop window, because Ian Foster made a comment about comparing Ireland, South Africa to New Zealand, Italy, and saying the ball and play time was really low in Ireland, South Africa. Do people really want to watch that versus our game against Italy? And I was just like, you're clearly one of the game's great thinkers, Ian, if that's what you're putting forward as a hypothesis. But it was an interesting debate. I think everyone agrees that this Ireland South Africa game was a much superior match, and I don't think anyone who watched it came away not enjoying it. But what did you make of his comments and that kind of debate?
I thought it was ludicrous, to be honest, because the ball and play time was only 2 minutes higher for Italy against New Zealand. It struck me as basically the equivalent of me deciding what I'm going to write a column on Saturday, and then the game doesn't support the hypothesis, but I still write the column anyway. It's it seemed to me that was premeditated. He had decided that this was what he was going to come out and say. And then even though the fact that there was only 2 more minutes, in that game of ball and play time, the ball and play time stat was just completely off the wall for the point that he was trying to make. But let's be honest, nobody wants to watch a game like New Zealand, Italy at all. But I think to give Foster the benefit of the doubt, and I seem to be giving a lot of people the benefit of the doubt when it comes to the press conferences, but there has to have been some sort of reason for that. And if I had to take a guess of what it was, I would think he's looking ahead to a quarterfinal with Ireland and is trying to sow the seeds in the officiating team's mind that Ireland are a team that likes to slow the ball down or likes to slow the game down. And he doesn't want that against New Zealand. So I think...
God, I think the complete opposite.
Well, it's funny that Jonathan makes that point, because I remember that 2021 match in the Aviva Stadium. After the game, he was really pointed in his press conference, being like, "Ireland, we're slowing it down." They were really taking their time.
It's so interesting.
We would never do that.
No, it's not. No, because I actually think the reason I prefer to play New Zealand than France is because I think New Zealand can only play that way. And I think that's when Ireland play their best rugby, is when it's a fast game. You saw what happened against France in the Aviva this year. They couldn't live with the ball and play time against us. They just couldn't. It's the only time I've ever seen, well, not the only time, but it's the first time I really saw Ireland totally looked like they were in control of that game against France, and it was because it was too quick for France. That's amazing. And I thought they actually played I thought Ireland completely outplayed New Zealand at pace down there. Now I think they do want to control parts of the game. You don't want to have too much unstructured against New Zealand. They have some fantastic athletes in broken field. But fast game suits Ireland. I don't know what Irish team he's watching. You think about Doris, you think about Van der Fleer, Ryan, Sheehan. You think about all these guys who are unbelievable on the ball. Tyke Furlong. They don't have those kind of players.
I think you meant that Ireland might play at a fast tempo when the ball's in play, but that they we're not feigning injury or taking time over injuries when the game was in the melting pot. But that was his point on that day anyway.
Was it? Yeah, because I think if it's a fast game, Ireland are fit. Ireland want to play at top of the game. For me, Ireland's concern is playing against France and South Africa, playing against the weight. going from set piece to set piece against a team like that. I think they can do that against New Zealand if they want, but I think they can also shred New Zealand up like they did on the New Zealand tour if they want, if it's a fast game too. I didn't think New Zealand's defence was any great shakes, and they did not deal with Ireland's passing ability and Ireland's decision making in the loose. Like, Ireland shredded them, you know. So I'm surprised to hear him looking for that with Ireland. But I get Jonathan's point.
That's I guess, like, you know, of what he's been doing. But I think, like, you know, if you're looking at South Africa against Ireland, like, yes, Ireland can play both styles of game, but if you're looking at a South Africa against Ireland type of game, can New Zealand win that type of game? So, like, New Zealand could beat Ireland if the game is fast-paced. I agree with you that I think Ireland, at the minute, as currently constituted, are better at that type of game than New Zealand are, but I don't think there's any chance that New Zealand win a South Africa-Ireland type game against Ireland. And, like, a large part of that's going to come down to the fact that their players don't really have the experience of these games anymore because, you know, they're not playing the South Africans in Super Rugby. They're playing Australian teams and playing the same way. Argentinian teams don't even really play in a traditional style anymore. If you look at the Pacific Islanders teams that they're playing, you know, all of these teams are playing at a high tempo, attacking the kind of game that could finish 40-25. And that's New Zealand's blueprint to win. Like, I don't think New Zealand are going to win, you know, any 18-13 game.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's funny you say 40-25. I'm pretty sure that's the exact score France beat them by in Paris in November 2021. So it shows, as I said earlier, like, they've had a lot of double-digit defeats against the big three at this World Cup over the last 2 years or so. So yeah, interesting comments. The mind games have really ratcheted up this week between Rassie, Erasmus, Ian Foster. You know, I don't know if Gregor Townsend's playing mind games or if he's just doing his usual talking up. But yeah, certainly, as we said, we've spent a lot of time talking about press conference. Might wrap up just with predictions then for the weekend. Ireland, Scotland. Luke, I'll go to you first. Well, sorry, I'll go to myself first. I'm expecting double-digit Ireland win. I think Ireland, as you said, are a better team. I think they're prepared well. They have good guys coming back in. Jack Cohen and Don Sheehan look like he might get a start. I think those Scotland comments will focus their minds if there was any complacency. So yeah, I'm expecting a 10-point win and a march on to the quarterfinals.
Yeah, I'd go with something similar. Yeah, I think Ireland will perform. I think the week off was perfect timing for them to refocus and get over the kind of climactic match against South Africa. I think it was a good time for them to refocus, and I think they'll just completely ignore all the Scotland chat and focus on themselves. And I think that's the most important thing. That's what's probably calming me down a bit, is I just have belief in the Irish team and where they're at mentally and where they're at with their game. I think they get their line out right with a little bit of a break and calm heads. And look, I think they've got better players. Like, I think the Finn Russell thing, that's always worked, and I just think people who think he's better than Johnny Sexton just don't know rugby, personally. I think the Irish pack is better. We'll have too much for them, and I think it's a tight enough battle out wide. They've got some threats, but I think Ireland have enough out there to beat them. Combined with a big kicking game, I think Van der Merwe is a different player when he's under pressure with the kicks, and Darcy Graham too. So I'd be attacking those two areas, and I expect Ireland to come out, maybe even more. I think maybe it's unusual I go for more points than you will, but I think maybe I think Ireland by 15.
Big win. Jonathan, you have the last word. Will it be a clean sweep?
Yeah, I was actually going to say Ireland by 15 as well. I just think Ireland's defence is so underrated. I think it's obviously because of the way that they attack. We don't really talk about the defence as much, but I think their defence is really well suited to playing Scotland. I think Ireland just have better players across the board, and I think really this tournament has reinforced the idea that the top four teams in it are a good bit better than even the fifth best team in it. And I see a sort of similar margin between Ireland and Scotland than that we had Scotland, South Africa. So yeah, 15, I think.
Well, it's set up to be a very exciting weekend as Ireland take on Scotland in the Stade de France. I'd like to thank Luke and Jonathan for joining me on tonight's episode of The Left Wing. Sinead, Rudd and Keane will be back later in the week with plenty more podcasts from France. In the meantime, you can subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts or listen on independent.ie. So until next time, thanks for listening and goodbye.